My life was gray and monotonous, like the rainy weekdays of October. Every morning I woke up at 6:30, ate oatmeal with prunes for breakfast, drank a cup of instant coffee, and went to work at a small IT company where I handled technical support for websites. The job didn't bring much joy, but the pay was steady, and at 32, I had long stopped dreaming of career breakthroughs. It was enough to cover the rent for my one-bedroom apartment on the city outskirts, buy groceries, and save a little for unexpected expenses. Weekends were spent at home, playing computer games or reading sci-fi novels. I occasionally met up with old school friends at a bar, but those gatherings were becoming rarer. Everyone had families, kids, and other responsibilities, while I remained a bachelor, accustomed to solitude. My apartment was in a panel-built 9-story building from the 1980s. Gray walls, narrow hallways, an elevator that worked sporadically. A typical picture of a residential district. The neighbors were quiet. Pensioners, young families with children, a few other solitary office workers like me. We greeted each other in the stairwell, but no one sought closer connections. That suited me fine. After 8 hours in an office, I craved peace and quiet. Evenings were spent cooking simple meals, watching news or TV series, and reading technical articles to keep up with industry developments. Life flowed steadily and predictably, without sharp turns or surprises. Some might find such an existence boring, but it suited me. I had long realized I wasn't made for great achievements and had accepted my role as an ordinary person, quietly living out my days. I worked at a small company that created and maintained corporate websites. Our office was on the second floor of an old building in the city center. The team was small, just 12 people, including the director. My workstation was in the corner of a large room, next to a window overlooking the courtyard. I handled technical support for clients, fixed code errors, updated content, and monitored website security. The work was routine, but I did it diligently. My colleagues treated me well, though I didn't have close friends among them. We talked mostly about work, occasionally discussing news or the weather. During lunch breaks, I usually went to a nearby cafe, ordered a business lunch, and read news on my phone. After work, I hurried home, avoiding corporate events or bar hangouts. My typical workday began with checking emails and the ticketing system. Clients sent requests to fix errors, update information, or add new sections to their websites. Most tasks were straightforward and resolved quickly, but occasionally, I had to tackle more complex issues. I enjoyed those moments. They required creativity, finding unconventional solutions, and digging into code. It broke the monotony and gave me a sense of professional accomplishment. Colleagues often came to me for help with technical issues. I willingly assisted, explained solutions, and shared expertise. Perhaps that was my only social role, being a helpful, knowledgeable specialist others could turn to for advice. On the evening when it all began, I returned home around 6:30 as usual. I reheated leftover soup, ate dinner, and watched the news. Nothing special was happening. Routine political debates, economic reports, stories about city life. I switched to the computer, intending to read technical blogs and check personal emails. I opened the browser and visited familiar websites. Everything worked as usual until I tried to access a forum discussing web development trends. Instead of the homepage, a CAPTCHA appeared. Nothing unusual. CAPTCHAs, to verify you're not a bot, are commonplace online. I expected to select images of cars or traffic lights as usual, but instead, there was a text field with a simple question. What's your name? Odd, I thought. CAPTCHAs don't typically ask for personal information. But I assumed it was a new type of verification, perhaps tied to the site's regional settings. I typed my name, Andre, and clicked confirm. The forum loaded, and I browsed new threads and discussions. Finding nothing particularly interesting, I closed the browser. The rest of the evening was spent reading a book, a sci-fi novel about a distant future where humans colonized other planets. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how exciting it would be to live in an era of space exploration and new worlds. Reality felt too gray and predictable by comparison. But these were fleeting thoughts before bed. Morning would bring the usual tasks, routine work, and familiar life. I couldn't have imagined that this evening would be my last calm one, and that a simple CAPTCHA would trigger events that would upend my entire existence. The next day started as usual. Oatmeal, coffee, and a ride to work on a crowded bus. Outside, a light drizzle turned the city into a blurry watercolor of gray and brown tones. Passengers sat in silence, glued to their phones, and I scrolled through social media, checking the news. The usual updates, political scandals, sports results, ads for products I didn't need. At the office, a pile of client requests awaited, complaints about slow website loading, requests for new pages, reports of errors in contact forms. I methodically addressed each issue, fixed code, and replied to emails. Work proceeded at its usual pace, steady and uneventful. Around noon, a colleague from another department asked for help with server configuration. The issue was trickier than expected, an unusual error I hadn't encountered before. It took over an hour of digging through logs, reviewing documentation, and testing solutions. Eventually, I found the cause, a conflict between two modules that only occurred with a specific combination of settings. Once resolved, I felt the familiar satisfaction of solving a problem. The colleague thanked me, and we returned to our desks. The day passed at its usual tempo, with no major incidents aside from that technical puzzle, which even amused me a little. After work, I stopped by the grocery store near my apartment. I needed bread, milk, and something for dinner. The store was crowded. It was the evening rush when everyone heads home and stocks up. I quickly grabbed what I needed, stood in line at the checkout, and overheard other customers' conversations. The woman in front of me complained to her friend about internet issues, while the man behind me talked on the phone about work. Typical evening bustle. I got home tired but content. Tasks were completed on time, clients were satisfied, I helped a colleague, and groceries were bought. Simple joys of an ordinary life. I ate dinner, pasta with canned meat, not the fanciest meal, but filling and quick to prepare. After a shower and changing into comfortable clothes, the day's tension began to fade. I decided to work on a personal project. A small website I was building pro bono for a local charity. It was my modest contribution to society, a way to feel useful beyond my job. The charity helped stray animals, and I was creating a simple site with information about the shelter, pet photos, and a donation form. Progress was slow. I only worked on it in the evenings, but the basic structure and several pages were already done. I opened my computer, launched the code editor, and started working on a photo gallery page for the animals. I needed to set up responsive design to ensure images displayed correctly on mobile devices. I got absorbed in the code, tweaking CSS styles and testing across browsers. Time flew by unnoticed. When you're doing something you enjoy, hours vanish. I hadn't realized 2 hours had passed. Once the page worked as intended, I decided to visit some technical forums to share a solution to the server issue I'd tackled earlier that day. I logged into a familiar web development forum. Another CAPTCHA appeared, this time asking, "What city do you live in?" I was slightly surprised. Yesterday it was my name, now my city. Was this a new user identification system? Maybe the site was collecting visitor demographics. I entered my city's name and clicked confirm. The forum loaded. I found the relevant thread, posted my solution, and got some thanks and follow-up questions from other users. Typical professional community interaction. Then I decided to check a news site for world updates. Another CAPTCHA appeared asking, "How old are you?" This was getting odd. 3 different sites, all with personal questions. Maybe it was a new anti-bot technology or a way to tailor ads. I entered my age, 32, and proceeded. The news was mundane. Politics, economics, incidents. Nothing particularly noteworthy. I skimmed headlines, read a couple of articles, and closed the browser. The rest of the evening was spent reading. I picked up the novel I'd started a few days earlier. A detective story about a series of mysterious murders in a small town. The plot was intricate, with multiple suspects and red herrings. The author skillfully maintained suspense, introducing new clues that shifted the narrative. I read on the couch, occasionally glancing out the window at the rainy night. Beyond the glass, the lights of neighboring buildings flickered, and cars occasionally passed, leaving wet trails on the asphalt. The quiet and calm I cherished after a noisy workday enveloped me. As I fell asleep, I thought about the novel, the cunning plans of the fictional killer, and how the author kept readers on edge until the resolution. I loved such books. They let me escape the everyday and dive into a world of thrilling events. Real life lacked such adventures, which was fine by me. I didn't seek excitement. I was content with the steady rhythm of my days. The strange CAPTCHA questions were the only unusual thing lately, but they didn't seem significant. Just a new technology that would soon become as routine as image-based CAPTCHAs. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain on the windows. The weather hadn't improved. Gray skies, wet streets, people hurrying under umbrellas. I ate breakfast, got ready for work, and took the bus to the city center. The office was warm and dry, a pleasant contrast to the damp weather outside. The workday began with checking emails, new client requests, responses to yesterday's emails, and server monitoring alerts. Everything was business as usual, with no emergencies or complex tasks. Around midday, a client called, the owner of a small online store. They were having issues with order payments. Customers couldn't complete purchases. I connected to the server, checked the logs, and identified an error in the payment system integration. The payment provider had updated their API, but the site was using an outdated version. Fixing it took about an hour. Updating the code, testing all functions, and ensuring payments worked correctly. The client was grateful for the quick resolution. Moments like these gave my work meaning, seeing my skills and efforts genuinely help people. That evening, I continued working on the charity website. I added an online donation feature, set up contact forms, and optimized image loading. The project was progressing well, and I could soon show a draft to the charity's volunteers. I decided to email them a link to the test version and ask for feedback. But when I tried to log into my email, another CAPTCHA appeared, this time asking, "Where do you work?" I paused. Yesterday it was my name and city, then my age, and now my workplace. The questions were getting more specific. Maybe it was a more detailed verification system or data collection for marketing. Either way, the information wasn't sensitive. I entered my company's name and moved on. I sent the email to the volunteers and checked other websites. 2 more had similar CAPTCHAs with personal questions. The rest of the evening, I watched a documentary about the evolution of internet technologies. It was fascinating to learn about the origins of the World Wide Web and how simple ideas grew into a global network that transformed the world. The internet's creators could hardly have imagined what it would become. Social media, e-commerce, cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence. Technology was advancing rapidly, and what seemed like sci-fi a decade ago was now commonplace. Perhaps these new CAPTCHAs with personal questions were just another step in the evolution of online security. The 4th day began with an unpleasant surprise. I woke up to the sound of notifications on my phone, several messages from colleagues and friends asking why I wasn't responding to their emails. Checking my email, I found my account was blocked. The support team had sent an automated message about suspicious activity and the need to verify my identity. Strange, I thought. I hadn't done anything suspicious. Perhaps the security system flagged something due to logins from different devices or a change in IP address. It happens sometimes with email services. I tried to regain access through the website's form. I entered my login, password, and answered the security questions. Everything was correct, but the system rejected it. A message appeared. To restore access, complete additional verification. I clicked the link and saw a familiar CAPTCHA window. This time the question was, "How tall are you?" I frowned. An email service asking about my height? This went beyond standard security measures. But I had no choice. Without email, I couldn't work properly. I entered my height, 178 centimeters, and clicked confirm. The system accepted the response, and access to my email was restored. All day, I thought about the incident. The account lockout and strange CAPTCHA questions felt suspicious. Maybe my account had been compromised and someone was trying to access my data. Or perhaps these were new security measures being rolled out by internet services. Either way, I needed to be more cautious. I changed passwords on all important websites, enabled 2-factor authentication where available, and checked active sessions on social media. Everything seemed normal. No suspicious logins or activity. Work that day was uneventful. A few routine tasks, a couple of consultations for colleagues, and an update to a client's website. But I couldn't shake the thoughts about the strange CAPTCHAs and blocked email. During lunch, I searched online for personal questions and CAPTCHAs, new user verification methods, and strange CAPTCHAs on websites. I found a few articles on evolving security technologies, but nothing specific about CAPTCHAs with personal questions. Maybe it was a new system still being implemented on some sites. That evening, I decided to run a small experiment. Ascend, descend. I visited several websites I didn't usually frequent to see if the same CAPTCHAs appeared. The first 3 sites had standard CAPTCHAs, image selections, or simple math problems. But on the 4th, a tech news portal, the familiar question appeared. What is your profession? I entered programmer and proceeded. Then I tried a sci-fi fan forum where I sometimes discussed books. There it asked, "What color are your eyes?" I answered honestly, "Brown." The situation was becoming increasingly odd. Different websites, but the same personal questions. Moreover, the questions were getting more detailed and intimate. First, my name and city. Basic information anyone could find on social media. Then age, workplace, height. Details not typically shared publicly. Now profession and eye color. Information only close acquaintances would know, or that requires in-person contact. It felt like someone was compiling a detailed profile of me, building a dossier. But who? And why? Ordinary hackers wouldn't care about my height or eye color. Marketing companies don't need such specifics for targeted ads. Government agencies? I hadn't done anything illegal, wasn't involved in politics, and had no access to sensitive information. Maybe it was a technical glitch, a bug in the CAPTCHA system that somehow synced across different sites. Such things happen when multiple platforms use the same bot protection service. For the next 2 days, I tried to avoid websites where these CAPTCHAs might appear. I stuck to work-related resources, email, and a few trusted news portals, but I couldn't avoid them entirely. CAPTCHAs popped up even on sites I'd visited regularly for years. The questions grew more personal. What's your shoe size? How many siblings do you have? What's your blood type? I answered honestly because incorrect responses could block access to needed information. But each time, my unease grew. It was especially strange that none of my colleagues or friends encountered similar CAPTCHAs. I cautiously asked if they'd noticed changes in website security or been asked personal questions during logins. All said no. It felt like these CAPTCHAs were targeting only me, as if someone was specifically after my account or computer. I scanned my system with antivirus software, checked the registry, and updated all programs. No malicious files or suspicious processes were found. My anxiety grew daily. I started documenting every CAPTCHA question, looking for patterns or logic. Name, city, age, workplace, height, profession, eye color, shoe size, number of siblings, blood type. It was a detailed portrait. But why would anyone need this? And why me? Was I unwittingly part of a social experiment or research study? Or was this social engineering, a method to gather personal data for future fraud? Over the weekend, I decided to disconnect from the internet. I turned off my computer, set my phone to airplane mode, grabbed a book, and went to the park. It was sunny and warm, a pleasant change after a week of rain. I walked along dry paths, sat on a bench, and watched people. Families with kids, elderly couples, youths with bicycles. A typical weekend scene. I read, thought about work, and planned the next week. Without the constant stream of online information, my thoughts felt clearer and calmer. Maybe I should take such breaks more often, stepping away from the digital world. But by Sunday evening, I was back on my computer. I needed to check email, finish tasks for Monday, and work on the charity website. Immediately, I encountered a new CAPTCHA. What was the name of your first dog? This question hit me hard. I did have a dog as a child, a mutt named Rex. But how could the system know this? I'd never mentioned Rex on social media or forums. Only my parents and a few childhood friends knew. I stared at the screen, hesitant to respond. Maybe it was a coincidence? A standard password recovery question? But in the context of the previous personal questions, it felt too suspicious. Someone clearly knew far more about my life than a stranger should. Eventually, I entered the dog's name. I had no choice if I wanted to keep using the internet. But that night, my sleep was restless, filled with strange dreams and anxious thoughts. Monday brought new surprises. I couldn't log into the corporate portal. It required additional verification. The administrator explained that security had tightened after several hacking attempts. I went through the identity verification process, including a CAPTCHA asking, "What was the name of your first school?" I answered correctly. School number 17. But the unease persisted. Even at work, I couldn't escape these strange questions. Colleagues noticed my anxiety. I was distracted, often zoning out, checking every website with heightened caution. When asked about my well-being, I gave vague responses. I didn't want to sound paranoid by mentioning the CAPTCHAs, but the internal tension grew daily. I began to suspect I was being watched, that someone was collecting information about my life for some purpose. But who and why remained a mystery. That evening, I tried using a different computer. My upstairs neighbor sometimes had laptop issues and I'd helped with repairs. I asked to use his machine to check my email. He agreed, and I cautiously opened the browser and visited familiar sites. No strange CAPTCHAs appeared, just standard image-based checks, math problems, or object selections. So the issue was tied to my computer or accounts. But back home, on my machine, the CAPTCHAs continued. Now they asked even more intimate details. What's your favorite color? What time do you usually go to bed? What's your favorite food? It felt like someone was studying my habits, preferences, and lifestyle. But for what purpose? Why did they need such detailed information about an ordinary person? Especially alarming was how precise the questions were becoming. When a CAPTCHA asked, "What movie did you watch last night?" I realized I was truly being watched. The previous evening, I'd watched an old horror movie I found online. No one could know this unless they had access to my browser history or were watching through my webcam. I checked privacy settings, taped over my camera, but the unease didn't fade. Sleep grew increasingly troubled. I dreamt of endless CAPTCHAs, personal questions growing stranger and more frightening. I woke up at night, checking my computer for signs of intrusion. Everything seemed normal. No suspicious processes, altered files, or odd network connections. Perhaps this was an advanced surveillance system leaving no visible traces. A week later, the questions became so personal I could no longer ignore them. A CAPTCHA asked, "What were you thinking about this morning in the shower?" This was beyond any reasonable explanation. No one could know my thoughts in the bathroom unless they had access to my mind. I began to seriously wonder if I was losing my sanity, if the CAPTCHAs were hallucinations born of stress and overwork. But when I tried not answering a question, my computer froze, the screen went black, and the system stopped responding. I had to reboot, and afterward, everything ran painfully slowly. The internet disconnected intermittently, and files opened with errors. It felt like someone was remotely controlling my computer, punishing me for noncompliance. I realized I couldn't ignore the questions anymore. Whatever force was behind these CAPTCHAs had real power over my devices. The next question was even more chilling. What did you feel when your mother died? My mother had passed away 3 years ago from cancer. It was the most painful topic in my life, one I avoided thinking about and never discussed. Even close friends only knew the fact of her death, not the details of my grief. My hands trembled as I typed the response. I had to relive those terrible months when my mother was in the hospital, when doctors gave up one by one, when I sat by her bedside, knowing I was losing the most important person in my life. Grief, despair, helplessness, all those feelings flooded back. I typed a few words about my pain and clicked confirm. The computer resumed normal operation as if rewarding my honesty. The next day I took a desperate step. I disconnected the internet at home, didn't turn on my computer, and put my phone in the airplane mode. I spent the entire day isolated from the digital world, reading books, cleaning the apartment, cooking, walking around the city. It felt strange to be cut off from the usual flow of information, but it brought some relief. No CAPTCHAs, no personal questions, No surveillance, but the isolation couldn't last forever. At work, I needed the internet. Clients expected solutions and projects demanded attention. When I turned on my office computer, the first CAPTCHA asked, "Where were you last night?" The system knew about my attempt to hide. Moreover, it was tracking my movements even without a network connection, perhaps through surveillance cameras, satellites, or cell towers. Modern technology offers countless ways to monitor someone. The questions grew more painful. CAPTCHAs asked about my childhood fears, failures in relationships, reasons for my solitude, and regrets over choices not made. Each response felt like a forced therapy session, making me relive the hardest moments of my life. I realized someone was methodically dissecting my personality, studying every trauma and weakness. Sleep nearly vanished. I lay awake at night, afraid to close my eyes, as dreams brought new, even more terrifying questions. It felt like this force could infiltrate my dreams, reaching the deepest corners of my mind. My work performance plummeted. I couldn't focus, constantly distracted, checking every website with dread, expecting the next question. Colleagues openly expressed concern. I looked exhausted, nervous, jumping at sudden noises. When asked about my well-being, I gave unconvincing answers. I didn't dare tell the truth. Who would believe a story about CAPTCHAs knowing the most intimate details of my life? It sounded like the ravings of a mentally unstable person. Maybe that's what was happening. Perhaps I was losing my mind under the weight of stress and loneliness. But the computer kept asking questions. Now they touched not just the past, but the present. What are you thinking about right now? What emotion dominates your heart at this moment? What are you most afraid to learn about yourself? It felt like this entity wasn't just collecting data, but trying to establish direct contact with my consciousness, tapping into my thoughts in real time. The most terrifying question came on Friday evening. What did you bury in the yard of the house where you grew up? I froze. There was indeed something buried in the yard of my childhood home. When I was 12, our cat, Mersic, died. My parents wanted to dispose of the body, but I insisted on burying it in the garden under an old apple tree. We dug a small hole and placed a box with the cat's body inside. That was over 20 years ago, known only to my parents. No records, photos, or social media mentions existed. How could this system know about a childhood pet burial? It was impossible unless someone had been watching me my entire life, or unless this entity had access to information beyond human reach, to memories, to the past, to events long forgotten. I typed the response with trembling fingers. Mersic the cat. The CAPTCHA accepted it, but instead of disappearing, a new message appeared. We know everything about you. We will come soon. The message, we know everything about you. We will come soon, lingered on the screen for nearly a minute before vanishing. I sat motionless, feeling a chill spread through my body. This was no longer a game or a technical glitch. Something real and sinister was showing interest in me. I turned off the computer and sat in the darkness of my apartment, listening to the sounds outside. The usual city noises, passing cars, voices of passers-by, barking dogs, now seemed suspicious. Every sound could mean that they were already here. The night passed without sleep. I lay in bed, tense, staring into the darkness of the room. Several times I thought I saw a shadow flicker in the corner or heard a creak in the hallway. But when I turned on the light, there was nothing. Perhaps it was paranoia born of nervous exhaustion. But the fear was too real to ignore. By morning, I decided I needed to seek help, to tell someone about what was happening, even if it sounded like the ravings of a madman. On Saturday morning, I called an old friend, Maxim from university. He worked in cybersecurity, specializing in hacking and cybercrime. If anyone could explain this from a technical perspective, it was him. We met at a cafe near his place. Maxim looked successful and confident. Expensive suit, the latest phone model, luxury watch. His success in IT allowed him to live lavishly. I told him the entire story from the beginning, trying to present the facts as objectively as possible. Maxim listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, processing what he'd heard. Finally, he said, "Andre, what you're describing is technically impossible. No system can know about your childhood memories or your thoughts in real time. You might be a victim of highly sophisticated social engineering. Someone has been studying your life for a long time, gathering information from various sources, and now they're using it for psychological pressure." But even Maxim couldn't explain how attackers could know about the buried cat or my thoughts in the shower. He suggested checking my computer for malware that might be sending data to third parties. We went to my apartment, and Maxim spent hours analyzing the system. He used professional tools, examining every process and network connection, but he found nothing suspicious. The computer was clean, no Trojans or spyware. Maxim was as puzzled as I was. If it's not a technical hack, then what? He mused aloud. He suggested disconnecting from the internet temporarily, replacing all my devices, even moving to a different place for a while. But we both knew that if this force truly knew everything about me, simple precautions wouldn't help. Maxim left, promising to investigate further and consult his cybersecurity colleagues. But I saw doubt in his eyes. He wasn't sure the problem had a technical solution. I spent the rest of the weekend in constant tension. I didn't turn on the computer, kept my phone off, and even avoided the TV. I read books, cooked, cleaned, anything to distract from anxious thoughts. But the fear didn't relent. I felt like a caged animal, aware it's being watched but unable to see the observer. Every sound outside, every creak in the stairwell made me tense and listen closely. On Sunday evening, what I feared most happened. The doorbell rang. A single short chime, then silence. I froze, too afraid to approach the door. The bell rang again. 2 short chimes, then 3, then 4. Someone was methodically increasing the number of rings, as if playing a sinister game with me. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The stairwell was empty, no one in sight, but the ringing continued. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, listening as the invisible caller kept ringing. 5 chimes, 6, 7. After 10, silence fell. I waited another half hour, but no one came. Maybe it was mischievous kids or a drunk neighbor mistaking my apartment. But in the context of everything happening, this felt like part of a larger, terrifying picture. They had made it clear they knew where I lived. Monday brought new horrors. I had to use the computer at work. Without the internet, I couldn't do my job. The first CAPTCHA asked, "Why didn't you open the door last night?" My worst fears were confirmed. They were watching me even at home. I answered honestly, I was afraid. The next question was even more chilling. What exactly are you afraid of? I typed, you. The CAPTCHA disappeared, but minutes later it reappeared with a new message. Correct. The workday turned into a nightmare. Every half hour, new CAPTCHAs appeared with increasingly threatening questions. Do you want to know what will happen to you tonight? Are you ready to meet? What would you like to say for the last time? I stopped answering some questions, but then the computer malfunctioned. Programs froze, files vanished, the screen flickered. Colleagues noticed my state. I looked like someone on the verge of a breakdown. During lunch, I tried to escape. I left the office and wandered the city streets, not knowing where I was going. I just wanted to move, to get as far as possible from computers and the internet. But even outside, I didn't feel safe. It seemed like surveillance cameras were turning to follow me. Passers-by stared too intently, and black cars trailed behind. Paranoia reached a fever pitch, but I could no longer distinguish real threats from my inflamed imagination. Back at the office, I found my computer on, though I was sure I'd turned it off. A new CAPTCHA glowed on the screen. Where were you the last hour? I answered, walking around the city. The next question sent a wave of icy dread through me. Which street were you on when you stopped at the bookstore window? It was true. I had paused at a bookstore, looking at new releases in the display. But how could this system know? Either I was being physically followed, or it had access to the city's surveillance cameras. The rest of the workday passed in a haze. I mechanically handled simple tasks, unable to focus on complex work. Colleagues asked questions, but I responded curtly, lost in my thoughts. My boss called me in and asked if I was okay. I lied, saying I had a cold and felt unwell. He sent me home early, advising rest and a doctor's visit. On the way home, I noticed the same dark blue car several times. It was parked near the office, then at the bus stop, then near my building's entrance. Coincidence or surveillance? I couldn't be sure of anything. At home, I checked all the locks, secured the chain, and closed the curtains. My apartment felt like a fortress, but I didn't feel protected. I felt trapped. That evening, I took a desperate step. I turned on the computer and initiated a dialogue with this mysterious entity. I visited a random website, waited for a CAPTCHA, and instead of answering the question, typed, "Who are you? What do you want?" The CAPTCHA vanished, but a minute later, it reappeared with a response. "We are the ones who watch. We want the truth." I typed, "What truth?" The reply came quickly. "The truth about who you really are, about your sins, about what you hide." The dialogue continued for nearly an hour. This entity claimed to know everything about every person, every thought, every action, every secret. It said people live in lies, hiding their true nature even from themselves, and that the time had come to remove all masks and reveal all secrets. I asked why they chose me. The answer was chilling. "You are not the first, nor the last. We come to everyone in turn. Your turn is now." When I tried to close the browser, the computer wouldn't respond. The screen filled with text, a long list of my actions, thoughts, and desires, starting from early childhood. The information was so detailed and accurate I couldn't doubt it. Small lies, secret desires, shameful thoughts I'd never shared, all laid out with cold precision. It was as if someone had kept a detailed diary of my life. The most terrifying part was that the list included actions I'd forgotten or tried not to think about, like when I was 8 and stole a fancy pen from a classmate, or at 15 when I spied on a neighbor through a window, or at 25 when I ignored an elderly person who fell on the street, pretending not to notice. Minor things that didn't make me a criminal but painted me in a less flattering light. And someone had seen it all, remembered it, recorded it. At the end of the list, a new message appeared. Tomorrow, you will learn the price of your sins. We are waiting for you at home. The screen went black, and the computer shut off. I sat in the dark, realizing something irreversible was coming. This entity was no longer playing, it was moving to action, and I could do nothing to stop it. The night was a nightmare. I didn't sleep a minute listening to every sound in the building and outside. Several times I thought I heard footsteps on the stairs, someone pausing at my door, or whispers behind the wall. But when I checked, no one was there. Maybe these were hallucinations born of fear and sleep deprivation. Or perhaps this force could remain invisible, infiltrating spaces without leaving traces. On Tuesday morning, I didn't go to work. I called my boss saying I was sick and needed a leave. My voice sounded convincingly ill and no one asked questions. I truly felt sick, physically and mentally. My body ached from constant tension. My head throbbed. My hands trembled. But illness wasn't the only reason to stay home. I was afraid to go outside, to turn on the computer, to interact with the world. The day dragged on agonizingly slowly. I tried to read but couldn't focus. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I cooked, but had no appetite. I kept listening for sounds in the stairwell, expecting a knock at the door or window. "We are waiting for you at home," echoed in my mind. What did it mean? Were they already here, in my apartment? Or would they come tonight? By evening, the tension reached its peak. I locked myself in the bathroom, the only room without windows where I felt relatively safe. I sat on the floor back against the door, waiting. I didn't know for what, but I was certain something was coming. And it did. Around 9 in the evening, strange things began happening in the apartment. First, the TV turned on by itself, then the computer, then the kitchen radio. All devices blared simultaneously, creating a cacophony of sounds. News snippets, music, static. But amidst the chaos, I heard other noises. Footsteps, voices, creaking floorboards. It was as if my apartment was filled with invisible guests. The noise in the apartment grew, turning into an unbearable hum. The TV, computer, and radio all came to life, spewing a chaotic mix of voices, music, and static. Amid this sonic chaos, I clearly heard footsteps, heavy, measured, as if someone was walking through the rooms, approaching the bathroom where I'd barricaded myself. The door trembled under my shoulders as if someone was gently but persistently pressing against it from the other side. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst through my chest. I clutched a kitchen knife I'd grabbed before locking myself in the bathroom. It was a feeble attempt to feel safe, but I knew the knife was useless against whatever was behind that door. Voices began to stand out from the noise. They were low, monotonous, almost mechanical, yet terrifyingly alive. They repeated my name. Andre, 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 with varying intonations, sometimes mocking, sometimes threatening, sometimes pleading. I covered my ears, trying to block them out, but the voices pierced directly into my mind, as if they didn't need air to resonate. They blended with fragments of my memories. My mother's voice calling me to dinner, the laughter of school friends, the stern tone of my math teacher. These weren't just sounds, they were pieces of my life, ripped from the past and twisted into a nightmarish parody. Suddenly everything fell silent. The quiet was so abrupt I flinched. Only my ragged breathing broke the dead stillness. I slowly uncovered my ears, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No static. Even the usual hum of the city outside was gone. Cautiously, I stood, holding the knife in front of me, and cracked open the bathroom door. The darkness of the apartment greeted me like a gaping maw. The light I'd left on in the hallway was off. Only the faint glow of the computer screen in the living room cast bluish flickers on the walls. I took a step forward, moving as silently as possible. Strangely, the floorboards didn't creak, unusual for the old parquet that normally betrayed every step. I reached the living room and froze. On the computer screen, a CAPTCHA appeared again, but this time it didn't ask for an answer. Instead, words slowly materialized. "Are you ready to see the truth?" I didn't have time to respond. The screen flickered and the text was replaced by a video feed. It was my apartment, filmed from above, as if a camera were mounted on the ceiling. I saw myself standing in the middle of the room, knife in hand, face contorted with fear. The camera slowly panned, showing every corner. My couch piled with books, the kitchen table with dinner remnants, the window with drawn curtains. But in the reflection of the glass, I saw something my eyes couldn't. Vague silhouettes moving through the room. They were barely discernible like shadows, but there were many. They surrounded me, invisible in the real world. I turned around, but saw no one. Only the shadows in the reflection moved, growing clearer. They had no faces, but their forms were humanoid, with long limbs and hunched backs. They made no sound, but I felt their presence, cold, oppressive, as if the air had thickened. The knife slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I backed against the wall, searching for any support. The computer screen flickered again, and the feed changed. Now it showed not my apartment, but the old house where I grew up. The camera focused on the garden, on the old apple tree under which we buried Mersic. The soil beneath the tree began to shift as if something was crawling out. I watched, unable to look away, as a box, the one we'd buried the cat in, slowly rose from the ground. It opened, but instead of Merzic's body, there was something else. A doll resembling me, 32-year-old Andre. The doll moved as if alive, its glass eyes staring straight into the camera, straight at me. I screamed. The sound echoed off the walls, but no one came to help. The neighbors, who usually heard every noise, were silent. The city outside was silent. The world seemed to have switched off, leaving me alone with this entity. The screen changed again, now showing my mother in her hospital bed. She turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes, once full of warmth, were now empty, like the doll's. She spoke, but it wasn't her voice. "You hid the truth, Andre. You lied to yourself. Now it's time to answer." I collapsed to my knees, covering my face with my hands. Memories flooded me with such force I could barely breathe. Every mistake, every small and large sin I'd tried to forget, surged back like scenes from a film. I saw myself stealing that pen in school, spying on the neighbor, passing by the fallen elderly man without helping. But there were other moments, ones I hadn't even realized were sins. My curt responses to my mother when she asked for help. My refusals to meet friends when they invited me out. My reluctance to live fully, hiding in routine and solitude. The screen flickered one last time and a new message appeared. "You are us. We are you." I didn't have time to process the words. The apartment door slammed open, though I was certain I'd locked it securely. No one stood in the doorway, but I felt an invisible force rush into the room, like a cold wind seeping into every cell of my body. The shadows from the glass reflection became tangible. They surrounded me, their long fingers reaching out, touching my skin. Not physically, but like they were probing my thoughts, my soul. I tried to stand, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The shadows whispered, their voices merging into a deafening chorus. You cannot hide. You cannot lie. You are part of us. I felt my will dissolving, my control slipping away. My mind filled with foreign images, not just my memories, but the lives, sins, and fears of others. I saw the faces of strangers, their tears, their pain, their crimes. It was like an infinite network linking all of us, billions of people, living and dead, into one horrifying collective. Suddenly, I understood this entity wasn't hackers, government agents, or marketers. It was something greater, beyond human comprehension. Perhaps it was the internet itself, come to life, a collective consciousness that knew everything about everyone. Or maybe an ancient force, awakened by the digital age, feeding on our data, our secrets, our souls. It asked questions not to gather information. It already knew everything. The questions were a test, a way to force me to confront my true self, stripped of masks and self-deception. I felt the shadows merge with me, my body no longer my own. I watched my hands move without my command. They picked up the knife from the floor and raised it to my throat. I tried to resist, but my will was too weak. The voices whispered, "You must pay the price. You must become part of us." I realized this was the end. Not death in the physical sense, but something worse. Dissolution. Vanishing into this endless network where individuality and freedom cease to exist. Only eternal observation and eternal truth. But at the last moment, as the blade touched my skin, I screamed. Not from fear, but from rage. I didn't want to become part of this. I didn't want to lose myself. With a tremendous effort, I threw the knife aside, lunged to the window, and flung it open. Cold night air rushed in, and the shadows seemed to recoil. Their whispers grew quieter, their presence weaker. I didn't know if it was temporary, but I'd bought myself a reprieve. I fled the apartment, stumbling down the stairs, and burst onto the street. The city was empty. No cars, no people, no lights and windows, just darkness and silence. I ran, not knowing where, until I reached the outskirts, an old, abandoned park. There, I collapsed onto the grass, gasping, and looked at the sky. The stars were bright but felt alien, as if they belonged to another world. I don't know how long I lay there. Hours, maybe minutes. When I returned home, the apartment was empty. The computer was off. The TV and radio silent. No shadows, no voices. Only silence. I checked every room, every corner. Nothing. Even the knife was gone from the floor. The next day, I quit my job. I told my boss I was moving to another city. I packed minimal belongings, left the apartment, and moved to a remote village where distant relatives lived. There was no internet, no computers, just nature, silence, and a simple life. I thought I'd escaped. I thought I'd left this entity behind. But a month later, while helping my relatives fix their TV, the screen flickered and a familiar CAPTCHA appeared. The question was simple. Did you think you could hide? I didn't answer. I yanked the cord from the outlet, smashed the TV with a hammer, and threw the pieces into the river. But I know it's not over. They're still watching. They'll always be watching. And one day, when I least expect it, they'll return. because the truth they seek isn't just mine. It's the truth of all humanity, and no one can hide from it forever. I've been living in the village for 6 months now. I help with chores, read old books, try not to think about the past. But every time I hear a crack in the night or see a shadow in the window, I know they're nearby. They're waiting. And I know that one day, they'll ask the final question. The one I won't have an answer for.